I still remember the day I decided to become someone I was not. A helpless, poor, naive old woman, a role I wore like a worn-out shawl, stitched together with silence and patience. People say age weakens you, but what they don't understand is that age teaches you how to hide your strength better than anyone else ever could. My name doesn't matter anymore. Once it meant something. Once it was spoken with respect in my home, with love by my husband, and with pride by my son. But time has a way of erasing names and replacing them with roles: mom, old woman, burden. I became a widow at 68. That day, the world did not end with a loud noise. It ended quietly in the soft beeping of hospital machines and the fatting warmth of my husband's hand in mine. He looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with something I couldn't understand back then. Now I do. It was worry, not for himself, but for me. "Take care of yourself," he whispered. But how does a woman take care of herself when her entire life was built around someone else? After his death, the house felt larger, colder. The walls echoed with memories. Every corner held a piece of him, his laughter, his voice, his presence. I would sit for hours just staring at his chair, waiting for a moment that would never come again. My son, Ethan, tried to comfort me. At least that's what I told myself in the beginning. He would sit with me, hold my hand, and say, "Mom, you're not alone, I'm here." And I believed him. I believed every word. But life has a cruel way of testing belief. A few months later, he told me he wanted to get married. I didn't object. Why would I? Every mother wants to see her child settled, happy. I even helped him choose the girl. She came from what seemed like a decent family. Her name was Emily. Beautiful, polite, soft-spoken, everything a mother-in-law could hope for. Or so I thought. The first time I met her family, I made a decision. A strange one, perhaps. I chose to hide who I really was. You see, my husband and I were not poor. We had built everything together from nothing, a comfortable home, savings, and a few properties. But after his death, I noticed something change in people. Relatives who once smiled warmly began to look at me differently. Conversations shifted. Respect faded. That's when I understood something important. People don't value you for who you are. They value what they think you are worth. So I decided to test them. When I went to meet Emily's family, I wore my oldest clothes. A faded sweater, simple shoes, no jewelry except a thin ring I couldn't part with. I kept my posture slightly bent, my voice soft, almost unsure. I played the role perfectly. Her mother looked at me from head to toe. That one glance told me more than words ever could. It wasn't kindness I saw, it was judgment. "Oh, you came alone?" she asked, her tone polite but distant. "Yes," I replied gently. "It's just me and my son." No mention of our assets, no mention of our past, just a simple, incomplete truth. They exchanged glances, quick, subtle, but I noticed. That was the beginning. Throughout the meeting, I remained quiet. I smiled when spoken to, nodded often, and asked very little. I let them lead the conversation, reveal themselves. And they did. Slowly, carefully, like a mask slipping off piece by piece. They asked about our financial situation, indirectly, of course. What does your son do? How big is your house? Do you have other family members? Each question was wrapped in politeness, but rooted in curiosity that felt heavy. I answered simply, vaguely. "He works hard," I said. "Our home is small but peaceful. It's just us." I watched their expressions change with each answer. Interest faded. Smiles became thinner. Respect diminished. But I kept playing my role. Because sometimes, the only way to see the truth is to step back and let others believe you cannot see at all. Emily, however, seemed different, at least at the time. She sat quietly beside her mother, her eyes occasionally meeting mine. There was something in her gaze, something I couldn't quite read. Was it sympathy? Or something else? When she spoke, her voice was gentle. "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything after the wedding." Those words should have comforted me. But instead, they unsettled me. Take care of everything. What did that mean? I smiled softly. Thank you. But inside, a small seed of doubt had already been planted. The wedding was arranged quickly. Too quickly, perhaps, but I said nothing. I told myself not to overthink. After all, I was just a mother who wanted her son to be happy. And so, the wedding took place. It was simple from our side, just as I had portrayed. But from their side, there was an expectation, a silent one. I could feel it in the air. Gifts. Status. Display. Things I deliberately chose not to show. I could see the disappointment again. And still, I said nothing. After the wedding, Emily came to live with us. From the very first day, something felt off. Not wrong in an obvious way, no shouting, no open disrespect, but something subtle, like a quiet shift in the air. She would look around the house carefully, as if measuring it. She would ask questions, small ones, casual ones. Is this the only property we have? Do you have any savings? Did he leave anything behind? Each question came wrapped in innocence. But I had lived long enough to recognize curiosity when it was genuine, and when it was not. So I continued my act. No, I would say gently, we live simply. And every time I said it, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not disappointment. Not sadness. Something else. Something colder. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. And slowly, very slowly, the truth began to reveal itself, not in big dramatic moments, but in small, quiet cracks. A tone here. A glance there. A whisper when she thought I couldn't hear. I remained silent. I watched. I listened. Because the role I had chosen, the helpless, naive mother, gave me something powerful. Invisibility. And when people think you are invisible, they stop hiding who they really are. That was when I began to learn the truth about my daughter-in-law. And what I learned changed everything. The first real crack appeared on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day that carries no warning of what it is about to reveal. I was sitting quietly in the corner of the living room, slowly mending an old piece of fabric, my hands moving with the calm rhythm of habit, while my mind stayed sharp and aware. Emily believed I lived in a world of small thoughts and fading memories, that I was too old and too simple to notice anything beyond my daily routine. That belief gave her comfort. It also gave me power. She was in the next room, speaking on the phone, her voice at first soft and familiar. I paid no attention in the beginning. It was natural for her to call her mother often. But then something changed. Her tone lowered, losing its sweetness, becoming sharper, more impatient. I didn't move, didn't lift my head, but every sense in me focused on her words. I already told you, she said, her voice edged with frustration. There's nothing here. The house is old and there's nothing hidden. I've checked everywhere. My fingers paused for the briefest moment on the cloth, but I forced them to continue, slow and steady, as if I had heard nothing at all. She continued, unaware. No, he doesn't question anything. He trusts me completely. There was a pause, followed by a quiet laugh that felt unfamiliar, almost cold. I'll handle it. Just give me a little more time. Something inside me shifted then. Not a loud break, not a sharp pain, but a quiet hardening, like stone forming where something soft once existed. The doubts I had carried were no longer shadows. They had become clear, undeniable truth. And still I remained silent. I finished stitching, folded the fabric neatly, and set it aside as though nothing had changed. When Emily stepped into the room, her face was calm, her expression carefully arranged into kindness. Do you need anything? She asked gently. I looked up at her with the same soft smile I had worn for months. No, I'm fine. In that moment, I realized something important. She believed her act was perfect, just as she believed mine was real. That evening, Ethan returned home later than usual. He looked tired, the weight of his responsibilities visible in the way he carried himself. I watched him carefully, hoping he might notice something, since the shift that had quietly taken place in our home. But he didn't. Emily greeted him warmly, took his coat, spoke to him with affection that seemed effortless and sincere. It was a perfect picture, one that would convince anyone that this was a happy home. I prepared dinner quietly, observing the details. The way she spoke to him. Always attentive. The way he looked at her with complete trust, unaware of the truth that stood just beneath the surface. And I understood then that this would not be a simple matter of truth revealing itself. Some truths hide too well. They need patience. They need time. That night, I lay awake long after the house had fallen silent. My thoughts moved slowly, carefully, like someone walking through a dark room, feeling each step before taking it. I thought about my husband, about the life we had built together, about the things we had protected. He had always been cautious, never quick to trust appearances. He used to tell me that not everyone who smiles at you wishes you well. At the time, I thought he was being overly careful. Now I understood that he had simply seen the world more clearly than I had. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. I moved through the house quietly, preparing breakfast, keeping everything as ordinary as possible. Emily joined me after a while, her expression relaxed, unaware of the quiet change that had already taken place within me. She poured herself a cup of coffee and glanced at me briefly. "You're up early," she said. I gave a small smile. "I've always been an early riser." She nodded, her attention already drifting elsewhere. After breakfast, Ethan left for work, and as soon as the door closed behind him, the atmosphere in the house shifted again. The warmth that followed him out seemed to disappear, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. Emily sat across from me, her eyes studying me more openly now. "Have you ever thought about selling this house?" she asked suddenly. The question did not surprise me, though I let it show lightly on my face. "Selling it," I repeated softly. "Why would we do that?" She leaned back slightly, her tone calm but deliberate. "It's just old and small. We could move somewhere better, more comfortable." I lowered my gaze as if considering her suggestion. "We don't have that kind of money," I said gently. "This house is all we have." There it was again, that faint flicker in her eyes, not disappointment, not exactly. Something sharper, more calculating. She leaned forward slightly. "Are you sure? I mean, he must have left something behind." I shook my head slowly, keeping my voice soft and curt. "He left us this home and memories, that's enough." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she watched me closely, as if trying to see through me. For a brief moment, I wondered if she suspected something, if she saw even a hint of the truth I was hiding. But then she looked away, her expression settling back into calm. "Of course," she said quietly. "Memories matter." But there was no warmth in her voice. As the days passed, her actions became more deliberate. She began going through things around the house more openly now, drawers, cabinets, old boxes that had been untouched for years. At first, she did it when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Later, she stopped caring whether I noticed or not. I continued my role, asking simple questions in an innocent tone. "Are you looking for something?" I would ask. She would smile lightly. "Just organizing." Organizing. Such a simple word, hiding such a clear intention. One afternoon, I found her in my room, going through an old storage trunk. She didn't even look startled when she saw me standing at the doorway. "I was just cleaning this out," she said calmly. I walked in slowly, my steps steady. "Old things have their place," I replied gently. "They don't bother anyone." She closed the trunk carefully, her eyes meeting mine. For a brief moment, silence filled the room, heavy and unspoken. It was the first time I felt that she might be testing me as much as I was testing her. But unlike her, I had patience. I had lived long enough to understand that truth reveals itself slowly, not in haste. That night, as I sat alone in my room, I made a quiet decision. If she wanted to search, I would let her search. If she wanted to believe there was nothing, I would let her believe it. Because sometimes the truth is not revealed by what you show, but by what others convince themselves is real. And I was beginning to see that Emily was not simply curious. She was waiting for the right moment, planning something I could not yet fully see. And whatever it was, I knew one thing with certainty. It was not going to end well for me unless I was ready. It was not long before Emily stopped pretending to be careful. The quiet politeness she once carried around me began to fade, replaced by something more direct, more confident. It wasn't open disrespect, not yet, but it was enough for someone like me to notice. I had spent a lifetime reading people, understanding what they said and what they chose not to say. And now, every small action of hers spoke louder than words. The house itself became her focus. She moved through it differently now, not like someone who had entered a new home, but like someone assessing ownership. She measured spaces with her eyes, paused in corners as if calculating something, and opened things without hesitation. Drawers that had remained untouched for years were suddenly no longer private. Cabinets were no longer just storage, they were possibilities to be explored. One morning, I found her standing near the hallway closet, holding a small box of old papers. She turned to me as if nothing was unusual. "There are a lot of documents here," she said casually. "Some of them look important." I walked toward her slowly, my expression calm. "Old papers," I replied. "Most of them don't matter anymore." She watched me closely as I spoke, as if trying to catch a hesitation in my voice. But I gave her nothing, just the same gentle tone, the same simple words. "Still," she said after a moment, "it might be a good idea to go through them properly. You never know what could be useful." Useful, that word lingered in the air between us. I nodded faintly, maybe someday. But I could see she had no intention of waiting for someday. That same afternoon, she made another call. This time, she didn't bother lowering her voice as much. Perhaps she had grown comfortable, or perhaps she had decided I was too insignificant to notice. "I told you," she said, her voice steady. "There's nothing obvious, but I don't think she's telling the whole truth." She paused, listening, then added, "No, she acts like she has nothing, but something feels off. I'll keep looking." My heart didn't race. I didn't feel fear the way someone younger might have. What I felt instead was a deep, quiet understanding. She was not just searching randomly anymore. She was suspicious. She believed there was something hidden. And she was right. That evening, when Ethan returned home, Emily behaved as she always did, warm, attentive, flawless. She asked about his day, served him dinner, laughed softly at the right moments. If I had not known what I knew, I might have believed it too. But I watched more carefully now. "Work has been stressful," Ethan said, rubbing his forehead. "There's talk about some changes in the company." Emily leaned closer, her voice filled with concern. "What kind of changes?" "Nothing certain yet," he replied, "but there might be layoffs." I saw it then, a brief flicker in her eyes. Not fear, not concern. Calculation. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a soft, sympathetic expression. "Don't worry," she said gently. "Everything will be fine." He smiled, reassured by her words. But I was not. That night, I sat alone in my room, thinking about everything I had seen and heard. The pieces were beginning to form a clearer picture, though it was still incomplete. She was not just interested in what we had. She was preparing for something more. Something that depended on it. The next few days confirmed my growing suspicion. Emily began asking questions more directly now, no longer hiding behind casual curiosity. "Do you have a bank account?" she asked one morning. "Yes," I replied simply. "Joint or separate?" "Separate." She nodded slowly, as if nodding something important. "That makes things a bit more complicated." I looked at her with mild confusion. "Complicated." She smiled lightly. "I just mean, if anything ever happens, it's easier when things are organized together." Her words were careful, but the meaning beneath them was clear. If anything ever happens. I lowered my gaze, pretending not to fully understand. "I don't think about such things." "But you should," she said, her tone slightly firmer now. "It's important." Important for whom? I didn't ask the question out loud. Instead, I let silence answer for me. As time passed, her patience seemed to thin. The subtlety she once relied on was slowly being replaced by quiet urgency. She checked my room more frequently now, sometimes when she thought I was asleep, sometimes when she believed I had stepped out. But I noticed everything. Every movement. Every change. One evening, as I returned from a short walk outside, I paused just before entering the house. The front door was slightly open, not enough to be obvious, but enough for me to hear voices inside. Emily's voice. And another, her mother, coming through the phone. "You're wasting time," her mother was saying, her tone sharper than I had ever heard before. "If there's something there, you need to find it before it's too late." "I'm trying," Emily replied, her voice tense, "but she's always around." "Then make a way," her mother said. "You didn't marry into that house for nothing." There was a brief silence, heavy with meaning. "I know," Emily said quietly. I stepped back from the door, my heart steady, my mind clearer than it had ever been. There it was. No more doubt. No more questions. This was not about curiosity. This was not about concern for the future. This was a plan. A plan I had walked into willingly, believing I was the one in control. I stood outside for a moment longer, letting the reality settle within me. Then I pushed the door open gently, making just enough noise to announce my presence. When Emily saw me, she ended the call quickly, her expression shifting back into its familiar calm. "You're back," she said, as if nothing had happened. "Yes," I replied softly, "just a short walk." We looked at each other for a moment, both of us aware of the silence between us, both of us pretending it meant nothing. But everything had changed. That night, I did not feel sadness. I did not feel anger. What I felt was something much stronger. Resolve. If they believed I was weak, I would remain weak in their eyes. If they believed I was unaware, I would let them believe it. Because now, I understood something they did not. They thought they were playing a careful game. But they had forgotten one thing. I had lived long enough to know every move before it was made. And I was no longer just watching. I was waiting. From that day on, I stopped seeing my home as just a place filled with memories and began to see it for what it had quietly become. A stage where every word, every movement, every silence carried meaning. Emily no longer bothered to hide her intentions as carefully as before, and I no longer pretended not to notice the shift. Instead, I leaned deeper into my role, becoming even slower in my movements, even softer in my speech, allowing her confidence to grow. There is a strange kind of power in being underestimated, a quiet advantage that reveals itself only when the other person begins to believe they have already won. I gave her that belief. I let her feel in control, and in doing so, I began to see more than she ever intended to show. She started bringing up the subject of finances more often, but now her tone carried a subtle pressure, a sense of urgency that she tried to mask behind concern. One evening, as we sat at the table, she spoke again about the future, her voice calm but deliberate. She said it would be wise to organize things properly, to ensure that everything was secure, especially given my age. I listened quietly, nodding at the right moments, offering no resistance but also no agreement. Ethan sat beside her, unaware of the deeper meaning behind her words, trusting her completely as always. I watched him carefully, searching for any sign that he might question her intentions, but there was none. His trust in her was unwavering, and that trust had become the very thing she was building her plans upon. The realization did not anger me as much as it saddened me, not because of what she was doing, but because of how easily he believed in her version of truth. As the days passed, Emily began to take more control over the house itself. She reorganized things without asking, moved items from one place to another, and slowly began to reshape the space in ways that made it feel less like my home and more like something else entirely. It was subtle at first, but it was enough for me to notice. She was not just searching anymore. She was settling in, as if preparing for a future she had already planned in her mind. One afternoon, she approached me with a stack of papers in her hand, her expression carefully neutral. She said she had been thinking about simplifying things, making life easier for everyone. She spoke about paperwork, about ownership, about how complicated matters could become if things were not properly arranged. Her words were smooth, practiced, almost rehearsed. I looked at the papers but did not reach for them. Instead, I asked her quietly what exactly she meant. She hesitated for only a second before explaining that it would be better if certain things were placed under joint control, that it would make everything more convenient in the future. I could see the expectation in her eyes, the belief that I would not question her, that I would simply agree without understanding. But I had already seen too much to remain unaware. I smiled faintly, keeping my voice soft, and told her that such decisions required time, that I was too old to rush into changes I did not fully understand. She did not argue, not directly, but I could feel the tension beneath her calm exterior. She was losing patience, and that made her more dangerous. That evening, I noticed something else. Ethan seemed more distracted than usual, his attention divided, his thoughts elsewhere. When I asked him if everything was all right, he brushed it off lightly, saying work had been demanding. But there was something in his tone that told me there was more he was not saying. Emily noticed it too, but her response was different. She became more attentive, more careful, almost as if she was trying to guide his thoughts in a particular direction. She reassured him often, spoke about the importance of planning ahead, about making smart decisions for the future. At the time, he seemed to accept her words without question, but I could see how carefully she was placing each idea into his mind, one piece at a time. It was not forceful. It was gradual, almost invisible, and that made it all the more effective. I began to understand that her plan was not just about finding something hidden. It was about shaping the future in a way that would eventually give her control, whether or not anything was discovered. The thought stayed with me long into the night, growing clearer with each passing moment. If she could not find what she was looking for, she would create a path that would lead her to it anyway. That realization changed something inside me. Until then, I had been watching, observing, waiting for her to reveal herself completely. But now I understood that waiting alone would not be enough. I needed to be prepared, not just to see the truth, but to respond to it when the time came. The next morning, I moved through the house as I always did, slow and quiet, maintaining the image I had carefully built. Emily greeted me with her usual calm expression, but there was a new sharpness in her eyes, a hint of determination that had not been there before. She had reached a point where patience was no longer her strength. She wanted results, and she wanted them soon. That same day, she brought up the subject again, this time more directly. She spoke about legal matters, about how things could become complicated if they were not handled properly. She mentioned documents, signatures, and arrangements that would ensure everything remained secure for the family. Her words were carefully chosen, but the intention behind them was unmistakable. I listened without interrupting, letting her finish before responding. When I finally spoke, my voice was as gentle as ever, but my words carried a quiet firmness. I told her that I trusted time more than quick decisions, that I believed important matters should not be rushed. For the first time, I saw a flicker of frustration break through her calm expression. It was brief, but it was enough. She had expected compliance, not resistance, even in its softest form. And that small moment told me something important. She was not used to being denied. As the day went on, the tension in the house lingered, subtle but present. Nothing was said openly, nothing was done dramatically, but the air itself felt different, as if something unseen was slowly building beneath the surface. That evening, as I sat alone in my room, I reflected on everything that had happened. The pieces were no longer scattered. They were forming a clear picture, one that I could no longer ignore. Emily was not just waiting anymore. She was preparing to act, and when she did, it would not be small or uncertain. It would be deliberate, calculated, and final. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking in a slow, steady breath. I thought about my husband, about the life we had built together, about the things we had protected with care and patience. I realized then that this was not just about me. It was about everything we had worked for, everything we had quietly safeguarded over the years. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep within me, that I would not let it slip away so easily. Not now. Not ever. By the time the 5th week passed after that conversation, the air inside the house had changed in a way that could no longer be ignored, even by someone pretending not to notice. Emily's patience had worn thin, and though she still carried herself with outward calm, there was a restlessness beneath it that showed in her movements, in the way she spoke, in the way her eyes lingered on things just a little too long. She was no longer simply observing or searching. She was trying to move things forward, to push events toward something she had already decided in her mind. I could feel it in the way she watched me now, as if measuring how much longer she would need to keep up her act before she took a more direct step. And so, I adjusted my own role accordingly, becoming even more fragile in her presence, even slower in my responses, giving her every reason to believe that I would eventually give in without resistance. One afternoon, she came into my room carrying a folder, her expression composed but her eyes focused with quiet determination. She sat down across from me and placed the folder on the table between us, her fingers resting lightly on top of it as though it held something important, something that required careful handling. She began to speak in a tone that was soft but deliberate, explaining that she had been thinking about the future again, about how uncertain life could be, especially at my age. She spoke about responsibility, about making sure that everything remained organized and protected for the family. Her words were gentle, But they were no longer indirect. They carried intention now, a clear direction she wanted me to follow. I looked at the folder but did not touch it, letting my gaze rest there for a moment before slowly lifting my eyes to meet hers. I asked her, in the same quiet tone I had always used, what exactly she wanted me to do. She hesitated only briefly before opening the folder and sliding a set of papers toward me. She said they were simple documents, nothing complicated, just something that would make things easier in the future. She explained that it would allow everything to be handled smoothly if anything ever happened, that it would prevent confusion, avoid legal trouble, and ensure that everything stayed within the family. Within the family. The words echoed in my mind, with a weight she probably did not intend me to feel. I leaned slightly forward, my movements slow, as though even reading such papers required effort. I glanced at the pages, not long enough to show understanding, but just enough to confirm what I already suspected. It was exactly what I had expected. A transfer of control, carefully worded, presented as protection, but designed for something else entirely. I did not react, not outwardly. Instead, I leaned back again, letting out a soft breath as though the effort had tired me. "I don't understand these things," I said gently. "They seem complicated." Her expression softened immediately, as if she had anticipated this response. "That's okay," she replied quickly. "You don't need to understand everything. I'll handle it. You just need to sign." Just need to sign. Such simple words, spoken so easily. I lowered my gaze, letting silence stretch between us for a moment. Then I shook my head slightly, my voice calm but firm in its softness. "I think I need time. I'm not used to making decisions like this so quickly." For the first time, she did not hide her reaction completely. It was small, just a tightening of her expression, a brief pause before she spoke again. But it was there. "Time for what?" she asked, her tone still controlled but carrying a hint of impatience. "It's just paperwork. There's nothing to worry about." I looked at her again, my eyes steady despite the gentleness in my voice. Important things should not be rushed. The words were simple, but they carried more weight than she expected. She leaned back slightly, studying me now with a different kind of attention. Not dismissive, not entirely confident anymore. There was a trace of uncertainty there, as if she was beginning to question whether I was truly as unaware as I appeared. But only for a moment. Then she smiled again, the same calm, reassuring smile she had used from the beginning. "Of course," she said. "Take your time." She closed the folder slowly, her movements careful, controlled. But I could feel the shift beneath that calm surface. She had expected this to be easy. She had expected me to agree without hesitation. And now that I hadn't, something in her plan had been delayed. After she left the room, I remained seated for a long time, my hands resting quietly in my lap. The papers were no longer in front of me, but their presence lingered in the room, in the air, in my thoughts. There was no longer any doubt about her intentions. She was not just searching for something hidden anymore. She was actively trying to secure control, to create a situation where everything would eventually fall into her hands, whether I agreed willingly or not. That realization did not bring fear. It brought clarity. That evening, when Ethan returned home, Emily behaved as she always did, warm, attentive, composed. But there was something slightly different now, something almost urgent beneath her calmness. During dinner, she brought up the subject again, this time in front of him. "I was talking to her earlier," she said casually, glancing at me before looking back at him. "About organizing things properly. It would make everything easier for us in the future." Ethan nodded, distracted at first, but then he looked at me. "What do you think?" I met his gaze, seeing the trust in his eyes, the same trust that had always been there. For a brief moment, I felt the weight of it, the responsibility of not breaking it too suddenly, too harshly. "I think," I said slowly, "that these things should be handled carefully." He nodded again, accepting my answer without question. But Emily did not look satisfied. Later that night, as I passed by their room, I heard her voice again, quieter this time but still clear enough. "She's delaying," she said. "I don't think she's as unaware as we thought." There was a pause, and then Ethan's voice, confused. What do you mean? Nothing, she replied quickly. Just, I think we need to be careful. Careful. The word lingered in my mind as I walked away, my steps slow and steady. She was beginning to sense something. Not the full truth, not yet, but enough to make her cautious. And that changed everything. Because now, the game was no longer one-sided. She was watching me, and I was watching her. But there was one difference she did not yet understand. I had already seen through her, and she was only just beginning to question me. From that point on, the silence between us was no longer empty. It was filled with awareness, with quiet suspicion moving in both directions. Emily no longer approached me with the same ease she once had. There was a new caution in her words, a slight hesitation before she spoke, as if she was weighing each sentence carefully. It was subtle, but I noticed it. I noticed everything. And in response, I made myself appear even weaker, even more absent-minded, as though time had finally begun to catch up with me. I repeated small things, pretended to forget where I had placed items, moved slower than before, allowing her to believe that whatever doubt had crossed her mind was unnecessary. And slowly, just as I expected, her confidence began to return. She started to believe again that I was exactly what I appeared to be, a tired, aging woman who did not fully understand what was happening around her. That belief made her careless. A few days later, she brought up the papers again, this time in a softer, almost concerned tone. She sat beside me instead of across from me, her voice lowered as if she were speaking out of genuine care rather than intention. She said she had been thinking about my hesitation, that she understood it must feel overwhelming, but that it was important to ensure everything was secure for the future. She spoke about unexpected situations, about how quickly life could change, about how difficult things could become if proper arrangements were not made in time. Her words were carefully chosen, designed to create a sense of urgency without sounding forceful. It was a different approach, more emotional than logical, and I could see the thought behind it. She was adjusting her strategy. I listened quietly, letting her finish, then nodded slowly as though I was beginning to understand. I told her that perhaps she was right, that maybe I had been overthinking things. I let a small trace of uncertainty enter my voice, just enough to encourage her. I could see the shift in her expression immediately, the subtle satisfaction, the quiet belief that she was finally making progress. She suggested that we could go over the documents together again, that she would explain everything in simpler terms this time. I agreed without resistance, maintaining the same gentle tone. But inside, I was already preparing for what would come next. When she brought the papers out again, I paid closer attention than before, though I made sure it did not show. I asked simple questions, the kind that someone unfamiliar with such matters would ask, allowing her to explain things in her own words. And as she did, she revealed more than she realized. The documents were not just about organization or convenience. They were structured in a way that would gradually give her control, placing decision-making power into her hands under the appearance of assistance and care. It was carefully planned, designed to look harmless on the surface while carrying deeper consequences beneath it. Anyone who did not look closely would have missed it entirely. I let her believe I was one of those people. After we finished going through the papers, she looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to agree, to sign, to take the final step she had been working toward. I held the pen in my hand for a moment, letting the silence stretch just long enough to build her anticipation. Then I placed it back down gently and sighed, as though I was tired. "I think I need a little more time," I said softly. "Just a little." For a second, her expression faltered. Not completely, but enough for me to see the frustration beneath her calm. She had come close, closer than before, and now it had slipped just out of her reach again. But she recovered quickly, nodding with understanding, telling me there was no rush, that I should take all the time I needed. Her voice remained gentle, but the tension beneath it had grown stronger. That night, the house felt heavier than usual. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It carried something unsettled within it, something waiting. I sat alone in my room, thinking about everything that had happened, about how far things had come since the day I first chose to hide who I really was. At that time, it had been a simple test, a way to understand the people entering my life. But now, it had become something much more complex. It was no longer just about observation. It was about protection. The following day, something unexpected happened. Ethan came to speak with me alone. It was rare for him to do that now. Most of his time was spent with Emily, and whatever conversations they had were usually shared or influenced. But this time, he sat beside me quietly, his expression thoughtful. "Mom," he began, hesitating slightly, "Emily mentioned the paperwork again. She says it's important." I looked at him calmly, studying his face. There was no suspicion there, no doubt, just concern and perhaps a bit of confusion. "What do you think?" I asked gently. He paused before answering. "I think, if it helps make things easier, maybe it's a good idea, but only if you're comfortable." His words were sincere, but they carried something else as well, an influence that was not entirely his own. I could hear her voice in them, even if he did not realize it. "I will decide when the time feels right," I replied softly. He nodded, accepting my answer without pushing further. But as he stood to leave, he added something that stayed with me. "She just wants what's best for us." For us. The phrase lingered in the air, long after he left the room. Later that evening, I noticed a change in Emily's behavior again. She was quieter than usual, more observant, her attention shifting between me and Ethan as though she was trying to measure something unseen. It was as if she was reassessing the situation, adjusting her approach once more. And I realized then that she was not going to give up easily. She had invested too much into this plan to walk away now. But neither was I. That night, as I lay in bed, I made another decision. I would let her come even closer. I would allow her to believe that she was finally succeeding, that all her effort was about to pay off. Because sometimes, the only way to truly understand someone's intentions is to let them reach the point where they think they have already won. And when that moment came, I would be ready. Because this was no longer just about what she wanted. It was about what I would allow. And I had not come this far to lose control now. The days that followed moved with a strange, quiet intensity, as though everything in the house was slowly being pulled toward a single moment that had not yet arrived. Emily became more careful again, but this time her caution was different. It was not the careless confidence she had before, nor the impatience that had briefly surfaced. It was something more controlled, more deliberate, as if she had learned from every step that had not gone as planned. And I, in turn, adjusted once more, allowing her to see exactly what she needed to see, nothing more, nothing less. I began to show small signs of hesitation turning into acceptance. Not openly, not all at once, but in small, carefully placed moments. I asked fewer questions. I listened more quietly. When she mentioned the papers again, I no longer resisted immediately. Instead, I nodded slowly, as though I was beginning to trust her judgment. Each of these changes was intentional, and I could see the effect they had on her. Her confidence returned, stronger than before, built now on the belief that persistence had finally begun to break through my uncertainty. One afternoon, she brought the documents again, but this time her approach was softer, almost patient. She sat beside me and spoke gently, explaining that she did not want to pressure me, that she only wanted to help. Her voice carried a warmth that might have convinced anyone else, but I had already learned to listen beyond tone, beyond expression. Still, I allowed myself to appear reassured. I told her that I trusted her, that I knew she would not do anything that could harm us. The moment I said those words, I saw it clearly. The quiet satisfaction in her eyes, the belief that she had finally reached the point she had been working toward all along. She opened the folder again, placing the papers in front of me, and this time I did not pull back. I leaned closer, my movements slow, as though I was gathering the courage to take a step I had been avoiding. She began explaining again, but her voice had changed slightly. There was less effort in it now, less need to convince, because she believed the decision had already been made in my mind. I picked up the pen. For a brief moment, everything felt still. The room, the air, even her breathing seemed to pause as she watched me. I could feel her anticipation, quiet but strong, as if she was holding on to the outcome before it had even happened. I lowered my gaze to the paper, letting the pen rest lightly against it, just enough to make it seem real. And then I stopped. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just a slight pause, as though something in my mind had caught my attention. I looked up at her, my expression uncertain. "There's something I don't understand," I said softly. The shift in her expression was immediate, though she tried to hide it. "What is it?" she asked, her voice still calm but tighter now. "This part," I said, pointing vaguely at the document without specifying anything clearly. "It seems complicated." She leaned closer, explaining again, her tone patient but with an edge of urgency now. I listened, nodding slowly, letting her believe I was following along. And when she finished, I lowered the pen again, as though preparing to sign. But once more I stopped. "I think I should rest," I said quietly, placing the pen down. "My head feels a little heavy." This time she could not hide her frustration completely. It showed in the slight tightening of her jaw, the brief pause before she responded. But she recovered quickly, telling me it was fine, that I should not push myself, that we could do it later. Her words were kind, but her eyes told a different story. She had come too close again. And once again, it had slipped away. That evening, the tension in the house was stronger than before. It was no longer hidden beneath politeness or routine. It lingered in the silence, in the way Emily moved through the rooms, in the way her attention stayed fixed on me longer than necessary. She was trying to understand what was holding me back, trying to determine whether it was genuine hesitation or something else entirely. Later that night, as I passed by the hallway, I heard her voice again, low but clear. "She was about to sign," she said. "I'm sure of it." There was a pause, and then her mother's voice, sharper this time. "Then why didn't she?" "I don't know," Emily replied, frustration slipping through. "It's like something stops her at the last moment." "Or she knows more than you think," her mother said. The silence that followed was heavy. "No," Emily said after a moment, her voice steadier now. "If she knew, she wouldn't act like this. She's just slow, careful." Her mother did not sound convinced. "Be careful yourself. If she's delaying this much, there's a reason." "I'll handle it," Emily said quietly. I moved away from the hallway, my steps as soft as ever, my expression unchanged. But inside, everything had become clearer. She was beginning to feel pressure, not just from her own expectations, but from outside as well. And pressure, I knew, had a way of forcing people to reveal more than they intended. The next morning, Emily behaved differently again. She was quieter, more observant, her attention sharper. She watched me closely, as though trying to catch something I might reveal without meaning to. But I gave her nothing. I remained exactly what she believed me to be, slow, uncertain, harmless. Yet beneath that appearance, my thoughts had already moved ahead. I knew now that she would not wait much longer. She would try something new, something more direct, something that would push things toward a conclusion. And when she did, I would be ready. Because this was no longer just her plan. It had become mine too. And I was no longer simply reacting to her moves. I was guiding them. The following days were filled with a tense rhythm, the quiet pulse of anticipation that ran through the house like an invisible current. Emily moved with precision now, no longer relying solely on charm or subtlety. Each step she took, each word she spoke, carried intent, and I allowed myself to appear as the frail, uncertain woman she expected. I repeated small mistakes, misplaced items intentionally, moved slower than necessary, feigned confusion, and let her believe she was gaining ground with every gesture. In truth, I was learning more with every move she made, observing the patterns, the timing, the slight changes in tone that revealed more than words ever could. It was a delicate game, one where patience became the greatest weapon. One afternoon, she came into the living room with a bright smile, carrying a tray of tea. She set it down in front of me, her movements careful, deliberate, as if every motion were being watched. "I thought you might like a little break," she said softly, her tone soothing. "It's been a long day." I nodded appreciatively, taking the cup, and allowed myself to drink slowly, savoring the moment, letting her believe she had created it, that she had managed to provide comfort and attention. I watched her as she settled across from me, her eyes flicking briefly toward the hallway, measuring, calculating. "I've been thinking more about what we discussed," she began, referring to the papers. "I just want to make things easier for you, for all of us. Life is unpredictable, and it would be best if we were prepared." Her words were gentle, wrapped in care, but beneath that warmth I felt the pressure building, the subtle push of intention. She wanted to see compliance, and I allowed her to imagine it. I responded with a quiet nod. "I understand," I said softly. "It is wise to be prepared." That was all she needed to hear to sense that she was gaining traction. She leaned forward slightly, placing her hands on the table, her movements measured, showing interest without revealing urgency. "Exactly," she said. "We just need to get things organized so that everyone is protected. Nothing drastic, nothing rushed, just order and security." Her focus was so sharp that she did not notice the small details I allowed myself to observe in return. The subtle hesitations in her expressions, the micro movements of her fingers, the careful way she chose her words. Each gave away more than she intended. And with each observation, I built my understanding, constructing a map of her intentions that no one else could see. That evening, Ethan mentioned a minor inconvenience at work, a problem that could be resolved if handled correctly. Emily immediately shifted her attention to him, her tone softening, offering guidance, solutions, and reassurances. I watched their interaction quietly, my mind tracing the layers beneath her outward kindness. She was planting seeds, shaping his thoughts, guiding decisions, molding the situation in ways that would serve her in the future. Yet she believed it all to be subtle, unnoticed, hidden. But I noticed. I had always noticed. Later that night, as the house quieted, I walked through the rooms, my steps deliberate, my presence a shadow moving among the light. I paused at the doorway of the study and observed Emily seated at the desk, papers spread before her, pen in hand. She was reviewing something intently, her face calm but her eyes alert. She spoke softly to herself, barely audible. "It's almost ready, just a little more time." The words, spoken as if in private, carried the weight of planning, and I understood their meaning fully. She was setting the stage for the next move, laying the groundwork to achieve what she had been waiting for all along. I retreated quietly, allowing her the illusion of privacy, while in my mind, every action of hers was recorded, analyzed, and catalogued. I had already seen the larger picture forming, the subtle architecture of her plan taking shape. Her patience, her careful approach, her incremental moves, all were pieces of a puzzle she believed she was completing unnoticed. But every piece also revealed her strategy, and every revelation strengthened my resolve. The following morning, Emily approached me again, her steps light, her expression composed. She spoke about small tasks, everyday matters, but I noticed the undercurrent beneath her words. Each suggestion, each recommendation was subtly tied to the greater goal she sought, her words laced with a purpose that went beyond what she showed. I listened quietly, acknowledging her ideas, responding with gentle agreement, giving her the impression of cooperation while keeping my mind firmly in control of the narrative she could not see. By the end of the day, it was clear that her methods were becoming more direct, though she still cloaked them in kindness. She no longer hid her intentions as much as before. The patience was still there, but urgency was beginning to color her actions. And I, having anticipated this evolution, allowed it. I allowed her to believe she was making progress, to feel the satisfaction of perceived advantage, all while I maintained the quiet power that comes from foresight, observation, and careful preparation. That night, as I sat alone, I reflected on everything. The patterns were clear, the intentions visible, and the next phase of her plan predictable. I understood that she believed the game was nearing its conclusion, that she was close to the outcome she had sought from the beginning. But she had underestimated one thing. I had been watching longer, thinking deeper, and preparing for every contingency she could not yet imagine. The house, the papers, the conversations, all of it was a stage, and I was not just a participant. I was a director in plain sight, guiding the unfolding story with patience and precision. And as I lay down that night, the quiet sense of anticipation was no longer mine alone. Emily had unknowingly stepped into a space where the rules had changed, where the player she thought was fragile had already begun to set the stage for what was to come. She would learn soon enough that appearances could be deceiving, that patience was a weapon, and that the most dangerous moves were the ones made quietly, invisibly, from a place where no one expected resistance. Because I was ready, and when the time came, Everything she believed she had earned would be challenged in ways she could never foresee. The days that followed grew even more tense, though nothing seemed overtly different on the surface. Emily maintained her composure, her charm intact, yet there was a subtle sharpness in the way she observed every interaction, every movement I made. I continued to play the part of the fragile, forgetful woman, the image she had come to trust. I misplaced things intentionally, repeated minor mistakes, allowed small inconveniences to happen, and each time she responded with patience carefully measured to appear natural. But beneath that calm, I could see her calculations, the way her mind worked through each scenario, as if she were mapping out the next several moves in a game only she thought she controlled. One morning, she brought breakfast to the table with a smile that seemed brighter than usual, her voice unusually soft. "I thought you might like something light today," she said. Placing the plate before me, I nodded, lifting a piece of toast and chewing slowly, letting her watch me, letting her think she had orchestrated the gesture. She sat opposite me, leaning forward slightly, and began speaking in that careful, deliberate tone she had perfected over weeks. She mentioned responsibilities, the importance of planning, of keeping things organized so that Ethan and I could both be secure in the future. Every word was designed to reinforce the image I had let her believe about my vulnerability. I listened attentively, nodding at intervals, asking small, innocent questions that seemed genuine. And in doing so, I uncovered more than she ever intended to reveal. The way she explained certain details, the way she hesitated at moments, the emphasis she placed on ownership and control, it all mapped out the architecture of her plan. She thought I was following blindly, but in truth, I was piecing together her strategy, learning how she intended to achieve her goals. Every subtle slip, every carefully worded suggestion, only made the picture clearer. Later that day, Ethan mentioned a minor financial issue at work, a problem that required advice. Emily immediately took the opportunity to step in, guiding him with solutions, showing concern, offering reassurance, all in a tone that made it sound natural, caring, even necessary. I watched closely, noting how she influenced him, how subtly she shaped his decisions, how much he trusted her without question. It was as if she had become the axis around which his thoughts now turned, a reality that did not escape me. In the evening, as the house quieted and shadows grew longer, I walked past the study where Emily had been sitting earlier. The papers she had been organizing were gone, but she was still at the desk, reviewing something on her laptop. Her fingers moved with precision, her gaze intent, her expression calm but focused. She spoke softly to herself. "Soon, everything will be in place." The words were casual, almost private, yet they carried the unmistakable weight of her intentions. She was preparing for the next move, laying the groundwork for what she believed was the final step. I retreated silently, returning to my room, my heart steady but alert. Her strategy was becoming clearer with each passing day, each move calculated to advance her goals without arousing suspicion. And yet, for all her planning, she did not see the full picture. She could not know that I had already anticipated this moment, that I had been building my own response quietly, invisibly, alongside her. The more certain she became of her progress, the more vulnerable she was to what I had prepared. That night, as I sat alone in the dim glow of the lamp, I reflected on the delicate balance of appearances. Emily had reached a stage where she thought she held the advantage. Her confidence had grown, her patience renewed, and her approach sharpened. But she had underestimated the depth of my awareness, the patience I had cultivated over years, and the resolve that had strengthened with each observation. I had allowed her to believe she was in control, letting her take the steps she thought would bring victory. And as I traced the outline of her plan in my mind, I realized that the advantage she sought was already slipping through her fingers. I had watched her grow bold, seen her reveal pieces of her intention she could not take back, and now I was preparing for the moment when all of it would be exposed in ways she could never have anticipated. The following morning, Emily approached with a new tactic. She was kinder, softer, and more insistent at the same time. She suggested we finalize the documents together to make the process simple and quick. I smiled faintly, as though the suggestion was reasonable, and agreed to review the papers once more. But even as I held them in my hands, I noticed subtle inconsistencies, slight manipulations that she must have thought would go unnoticed. Her overconfidence had begun to betray her. I asked careful, probing questions, the kind that seemed innocent but were designed to test her understanding, to observe how she would respond. And each answer she gave revealed more than she intended. There was tension now beneath her calm, a trace of impatience trying to break through, a crack in the facade she had maintained for so long. That evening, as Ethan went to bed, Emily lingered in the living room, organizing her thoughts, her plans, her strategy. I sat quietly in the shadows, letting her believe she had earned a moment of control, all the while storing each word, each gesture, each subtle misstep in my mind. Because soon, very soon, the carefully constructed illusion she had relied upon would collapse. And when it did, the truth she had worked so hard to hide, and the intentions she had so meticulously concealed, would be revealed to her in full. The days moved like slow currents, almost imperceptible in their flow, yet each one carried a mounting tension beneath the surface. Emily had adjusted her approach once more, blending patience with insistence, kindness with subtle pressure. She no longer tried to rush me openly, but there was a quiet insistence in her tone, a soft but persistent push that suggested she expected compliance eventually. I allowed her to believe she was guiding the course of events, nodding gently, appearing to consider her words carefully, all while observing every detail she could not hide. Her movements, her glances, the slight inflection in her voice, everything revealed her intent, and each observation sharpened my understanding. One afternoon, she came into the study where I was reading, carrying a folder she had prepared herself. "I thought it might be easier if we went through these together," she said, her voice soft but confident, her smile carefully measured. I looked up slowly, acknowledging her presence, and gestured for her to sit. I let her take the initiative to lay out the papers, to explain every point, believing she was in control. And for a moment, she was. She leaned closer, her expression open, her voice patient as she explained each detail, unaware that I had already grasped the deeper implications of every clause and paragraph she highlighted. She thought she was preparing me to comply, when in truth, I was preparing to observe, to catalog, to anticipate the next moves she had not yet imagined. After she spoke, I asked questions, not aggressively, not suspiciously, but in a gentle, distracted tone that suggested genuine confusion. Each question led her to reveal more than she intended. She elaborated, clarified, emphasized points with subtle urgency, as though persuading a hesitant mind. And in doing so, she exposed the framework of her plan, piece by piece. I listened, nodded, smiled faintly, and allowed her to feel the satisfaction of progress, all while holding the understanding she could not yet perceive. Ethan entered the room unexpectedly, carrying a stack of papers from his office. Emily's attention immediately shifted, her tone softening, offering guidance and reassurance. I watched the interaction closely, noting how she molded the conversation, how subtly she steered his decisions, and how completely he trusted her. It was a masterclass in influence, and yet she remained unaware that her moves were being seen in a completely different light. I had begun to anticipate her every maneuver, predicting how she would respond, and observing where her overconfidence created vulnerability. That evening, the quiet tension of the house became palpable. I noticed Emily lingering longer in certain rooms, her gaze sweeping across surfaces as if ensuring everything was exactly as she intended. The papers had been reviewed multiple times now, yet she returned to them, checking, double-checking, making adjustments in her mind before they could be finalized. She was meticulous, precise, careful, but impatient. The combination was dangerous, and I allowed her the illusion that she was in complete control, while carefully noting every detail for future reference. As night fell, I moved quietly through the hallways, my presence barely noticeable, my thoughts focused. The house seemed to hold its breath along with me, as though sensing the unspoken tension that had grown over the past weeks. I paused outside the study, watching her from the doorway. She was seated at the desk, pen in hand, papers spread before her. Her lips moved silently as she murmured reminders to herself, almost like a mantra. Soon, almost ready, just a little more. The words were casual, intimate, yet they revealed the strategy she had been building tirelessly, unaware that her plan was now fully visible to someone who had been watching with patience and calculation. I retreated softly, returning to the quiet of my room, reflecting on the delicate balance of observation and preparation. Emily's confidence had grown. Her influence over Ethan had strengthened, and her plan appeared closer to fruition than ever. Yet with every move, every careful step she took, she revealed cracks in her composure, small hints of the impatience and overreach that I had been waiting for. The longer she persisted, the more the pieces of her plan exposed themselves, allowing me to prepare for the moment when the illusion would collapse. The following morning, Emily approached with renewed energy, suggesting we finalize certain decisions. Her voice was calm, her expressions warm, but her eyes carried an unmistakable intensity, a focus sharpened by anticipation. I allowed her to guide the conversation, nodding along, asking soft, probing questions that encouraged her to elaborate, unknowingly revealing more about her intentions than she could have realized. She did not notice that every step she took brought her closer to a confrontation she had not anticipated, that every carefully planned move was being absorbed, understood, and countered silently. By the evening, the tension in the house had become almost tangible. Emily had not yet realized that the game had shifted entirely. She believed she was approaching a victory she had been meticulously planning for weeks, when in reality, her success was an illusion carefully maintained by my patience, observation, and strategic restraint. She would soon learn that the one she underestimated the most, the quiet, fragile woman she thought she could control, was already several steps ahead. And when the moment of truth finally arrived, she would discover that appearances could be deceiving, that patience and awareness were far more powerful than cunning, and that the outcome she had pursued so relentlessly was no longer entirely in her hands. The tension in the house grew heavier with each passing day, though outwardly everything seemed calm. Emily had perfected her act of patience and subtle persuasion, yet beneath her composed exterior, I could sense the urgency building, the careful balance between control and impatience beginning to tip. She no longer approached me with open insistence. Instead, her moves were calculated, quiet, almost invisible, but I could feel them, anticipate them, and respond without revealing my awareness. Every gesture, every word, every smile carried intent, and I allowed her to believe that each one was effective, that she was inching closer to the result she sought. One morning, she appeared at the breakfast table with a careful arrangement of dishes, her voice soft and gentle as she spoke about the day ahead. "I thought we could go over a few things after breakfast," she said, placing a folder in front of me. I nodded slowly, taking a sip of my tea, and allowed her to guide the conversation. She spread out the papers with precision, explaining each point in a tone designed to sound helpful, caring, and necessary. And as she spoke, I listened, noting subtle patterns in her approach, slight hesitations that revealed the extent of her calculations, the underlying pressure she applied without acknowledging it. I asked small, seemingly naive questions, letting her explain details she might have thought were obvious. Each answer she gave revealed more about her intent, more about the structure of the plan she had meticulously constructed. She believed I was learning, absorbing, ready to comply, when in truth, I was gathering the pieces I needed to understand the full design, to map the steps she had taken and anticipate the ones she would take next. Every carefully orchestrated word, every gesture of patience and control, became a window into her strategy. Later that day, Ethan mentioned a minor issue at work, something that required judgment and guidance. Emily immediately stepped in, offering advice with a calm, confident tone, her expressions carefully measured to reassure and persuade him. I observed quietly, noting how she directed his thoughts, how subtly she influenced decisions, how completely he trusted her judgment. It was impressive, the skill with which she maneuvered, and yet all of it was laid bare to me through the small tells, the overconfidence, the micro-expressions that betrayed intent even when hidden beneath careful words. That evening, the quiet of the house seemed heavier, more expectant. I moved through the rooms, observing Emily as she reviewed documents and arranged papers on the desk. She muttered softly to herself, "Just a little more, almost ready, everything in place." The words, private and casual, revealed the mental preparation and strategy behind her calm exterior. She was so focused on the next step that she could not see the vulnerability inherent in her overconfidence, the subtle cracks in her timing and judgment that I had been waiting for. I retreated quietly to my room, reflecting on the pattern of her actions. She had grown bold, confident, meticulous, but the closer she came to her perceived victory, the more she exposed her plan to scrutiny. Every move she believed secret, every carefully thought-out step, was now an opportunity for me to anticipate, prepare, and guide the unfolding events without her realizing it. The game had shifted entirely. She thought she held the advantage, but in reality, she had walked directly into the space where I had been waiting, fully aware and fully prepared. The following morning, she approached again, her voice calm but insistent, her tone carefully measured to appear patient and helpful. She suggested we finalize the documents, guiding the conversation with an ease she believed persuasive. I allowed her the appearance of control, nodding, asking soft, thoughtful questions that seemed hesitant but were designed to draw out every detail of her intent. She explained, elaborated, repeated, thinking she was securing agreement and compliance, unaware that with each answer, she revealed more about the structure and purpose of her plan. By evening, the tension in the house was nearly tangible. Emily was so focused on the anticipated conclusion that she failed to notice the subtle resistance and quiet preparation I had cultivated over weeks. She believed she was approaching a long-awaited victory, yet the foundation of her confidence was based on assumptions she could not see were false. I knew that the moment of confrontation was nearing. Her patience, her persistence, her careful calculations had led her to a point where she believed the end was within reach. But the culmination of all her effort would not unfold as she expected. The careful, quiet strength she had underestimated, the observation she had ignored, and the patience she had dismissed were now the forces that would determine the outcome. And when that moment arrived, she would discover the true weight of underestimating someone who had been watching, learning, and preparing in silence from the very beginning. The house had changed, the game had shifted, and I was ready. The morning arrived with a quiet clarity, the kind that feels ordinary on the surface but carries an invisible charge beneath it. Emily approached me with her usual calm, a soft smile, a folder in hand, believing that today would mark the culmination of her patient efforts. She suggested we go over the documents one final time, her tone gentle yet insistent, crafted to create the illusion of inevitability. I nodded slowly, taking the folder from her hands, letting her believe she was guiding me fully, that her meticulous planning had reached its long-awaited conclusion. She did not realize that everything she had revealed, the smallest gestures, every word, each careful pause, had been absorbed, catalogued, and transformed into understanding I had carefully nurtured over weeks. We sat together, the papers spread before us, and she began explaining the details once more. I listened attentively, nodding, asking small, naive-sounding questions that drew her deeper into her own narrative. With every answer she gave, every justification she offered, she unknowingly exposed the full design of her intentions. Her confidence grew with each explanation, her belief in her control solidifying, unaware that she had led herself into a situation where her plan could be observed from every angle, every weakness visible to one who had no reason to reveal herself prematurely. As she continued, I allowed subtle pauses in my responses, drawing her forward, creating spaces where her eagerness to secure agreement carried her further into revealing more than she intended. I let her believe that her patience and persistence had won, that the final step was inevitable. And yet, within those moments, I had full clarity. The details she thought hidden, the subtle manipulations she believed unnoticed, the small overreaches of her influence, all were now fully apparent to me. Ethan entered the room briefly, asking a question about something unrelated. Emily turned to him immediately, her attention shifting, offering advice and guidance with practiced ease. I observed silently, noting every movement, every expression, the way she positioned herself between him and me. She believed she was building trust, reinforcing her influence, shaping outcomes to her favor, unaware that each action she took was now part of a larger understanding I had developed over the weeks. Her moves, precise and careful, were also the very threads I could follow to anticipate every next step. Finally, she returned to the task at hand, her focus unwavering. I placed my pen over the document as if about to sign, letting the moment stretch, allowing her to feel the weight of victory. But then, slowly, deliberately, I lifted my gaze and met hers. I asked one simple question, softly, almost innocently, yet with precision. "Emily, if this were reversed, would you trust it?" Her confidence faltered, just slightly, but enough for me to see the crack in her composure. She hesitated, searching for an answer, caught between her strategy and the subtle reality she had not anticipated. It was a brief moment, a pause she could not control, and in that instant, the balance of power shifted entirely. I think so," she said, her voice uncertain, the edges of control slipping as she realized that the situation was no longer entirely within her hands. I nodded gently, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on my lips. "Then let us proceed carefully," I said, "because trust is earned, not given blindly." The room was silent for a long moment. Every gesture, every breath carried meaning. She realized then that the careful, calculated patience she had relied upon was no longer sufficient. Her meticulous planning, her persistence, her subtle manipulations, they had all been observed, understood, and quietly countered. The advantage she thought she had acquired through influence and charm was now balanced by awareness, preparation, and quiet strength she had never noticed. Over the following hours, as we reviewed the documents, I maintained the fragile appearance she expected, asking soft questions, showing apparent hesitation, and listening attentively. Each time she tried to steer, to persuade, to finalize, I allowed just enough compliance to let her feel in control while guiding the pace, the perception, the understanding of what would ultimately be decided. She began to sense that something was different, that the fragile, uncertain woman she had underestimated was no longer a passive participant, but a subtle force of observation and foresight. By evening, the house felt lighter, yet charged with unspoken understanding. Emily had realized, in fragments and flashes, that the quiet patience she had dismissed could be far more powerful than persistence alone. Every subtle move she made had been anticipated, every carefully laid plan seen, every hidden intention acknowledged. And in that realization, the tension shifted from her to a balance, where control was no longer absolute in her hands. As night fell, I reflected on the journey of the past weeks, the careful observation, the patient endurance, the deliberate appearances of weakness that concealed awareness and understanding. Emily's intentions, meticulously revealed, had provided clarity, foresight, and preparation. The fragile, uncertain image she believed she had manipulated was, in reality, the instrument through which I had quietly guided, observed, and prepared for the inevitable moment of reckoning. And in that quiet night, I understood fully. Appearances deceive, patience empowers, and the strength of awareness can quietly overturn even the most calculated designs. Emily had played her game meticulously, yet she had failed to see the depth of what she had been dealing with. She had underestimated the quiet force behind the eyes she thought were blind, the subtle mind behind the fragile gestures she believed naive. Truth had been revealed not through confrontation, not through force, but through quiet observation, careful patience, and the unwavering awareness of someone who had chosen to see the whole picture from the beginning. The game had ended, not with a dramatic clash, but with the gentle clarity of understanding. And in that clarity, the house finally felt still, the tension released, the lessons of the past weeks quietly acknowledged, and the quiet, patient strength of one who had endured and observed finally affirmed. The chapter was closed, the revelation complete, and the fragile, naive mother Emily had underestimated was gone, replaced by the woman who had watched, learned, and quietly prevailed.